Canada and the USA, a political storm brewing? For decades, the border between the United States and Canada has been considered one of the most peaceful in the world. The two countries, although different in many ways, have been linked by economic, military, and cultural cooperation. But is this status quo coming to an end? In recent months, tensions have been growing between Washington and Ottawa. Some are calling it the biggest crisis in relations between these two countries in decades. The reason? There have been voices, and not just anywhere, that Canada could become part of the United States. Is this a realistic scenario, or just a political stunt? Has history known similar cases? To understand how this moment came about, we need to go back in time. Because although today the idea of the US annexing Canada seems shocking, it is not a new concept. In fact, since the very founding of the United States, American politicians have had an appetite for the northern lands. What were the previous attempts to take over Canada? What political and economic forces are driving today's debate? And most importantly, is this scenario even possible? Stay with me, because this story is more complicated than it might seem. From the very beginning of the United States, there have been voices about annexing Canada. As early as 1777, the Americans had foreseen the possibility of accepting Quebec in the Articles of Confederation, and during the War of Independence, they tried to occupy the St. Lawrence River Valley, but without success. Another attempt was made in the War of 1812, but once again the Americans were repelled. In 1837, groups of Irish immigrants attempted to annex the country by force as part of the short-lived Patriot War. Although not all of the rebels wanted union with the United States, some sought complete independence from Great Britain. The Canadians, largely loyal to the Crown, did not support these actions, and the British authorities quickly suppressed them. In the mid-19th century, the idea of annexation found support in Quebec and Montreal, where economic stagnation prompted some politicians and businessmen to advocate integration with the United States. In 1849, the Montreal Annexation Manifesto was even published, calling for a union for better trade and security. However, after the signing of a favorable free trade treaty with the United States in 1854, the movement weakened. In the West, after the U.S. purchased Alaska in 1867, some residents of British Columbia began to fear isolation and advocated for annexation to the states. A petition to President Grant was even signed, but public support was weak, and in 1871, the region joined Canada. In the East, in Nova Scotia, there was a strong anti-Confederation sentiment. Some politicians considered breaking away from Canada and becoming independent from British decisions, but the lack of real support and the improving economic situation meant that the movement quickly died out. In the 1880s, Prosper Bender, a homeopathic physician from Quebec, became disillusioned with Canadian Confederation and moved to Boston, becoming a fervent supporter of annexation to the United States. He argued that many Canadians, especially younger and Irish Catholics, would prefer to join the rapidly expanding United States. He pointed to Canada's growing debt and argued that its economy would benefit from opening its market to American capital. In 1891, historian Goldwin Smith predicted that annexation was inevitable, but his view did not find wide support. A few years later, Prime Minister John Thompson downplayed the annexation idea, emphasizing Canada's loyalty to Great Britain. In the early 20th century, British journalist W.T. Stead predicted that Canada would eventually join the United States, citing growing economic ties and border disputes such as Alaska. However, in 1903, a British arbitration court ruled in favor of the United States, leaving Canada feeling betrayed by London. In the 1930s, closer relations between Canada and the US were established, but instead of annexation, cooperation was preferred, symbolized by the International Peace Garden on the border of Manitoba and North Dakota. After World War II, the idea of rapprochement with the US emerged in Newfoundland, but in 1949, the province finally joined Canada. In the 1980s, marginal movements for union with the US emerged, such as the Unionist Party in Saskatchewan and Party 51 in Quebec, but their influence was negligible. In the 21st century, the topic has occasionally returned. In 2016, Party 51 was revived by Hans Mercier, but it received minimal support in the elections. According to a poll from the 2020s, about 50% of Americans opposed Canada's admission to the US, 25% were in favor, and the rest had no opinion. Historian Joseph Levitt emphasizes that no serious political movement in the US or Canada has ever tried to push the issue. Polls show that support among Canadians is negligible, from 20% in 2001 to just 7% in 2004. Despite this, Donald Trump, after winning in 2024, heated up the issue again, suggesting the possibility of annexing Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau quickly put an end to speculation, writing on the X platform, "There is no chance whatsoever that Canada will become part of the United States." Although the idea of annexing Canada by the United States has appeared many times, it has never gained mass support. Canadians feared losing their identity, and the American Civil War showed that the American system is not as stable as it may have seemed. Is the situation different today, in 2025? In December 2024, just after President-elect Donald Trump began voicing support for Canada to annex the United States as the 51st state, there were hints of the idea. This followed months of tariff threats against Canadian goods and Trump's renewed demands that Canada increase its military spending and focus on border security. Most Canadian politicians rejected the proposal, and many Canadians expressed opposition to the idea, as evidenced by opinion polls. In early December 2024, during a tense meeting at Mar-a-Lago, Trump suggested that Canada consider becoming the 51st state of the United States if Prime Minister Trudeau believed the planned tariffs would hurt the Canadian economy. He referred to Trudeau as Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada and expressed hope for a follow-up meeting to continue trade talks. Ontario Premier Doug Ford jokingly addressed the situation, suggesting that it was Trump's revenge for the War of 1812. In response to the suggestion that Canada would be too liberal, Trump suggested that Canada could join the Union as two states, one more conservative, the other more liberal. The initial idea was for Canada not to maintain its current administrative structure of 10 provinces and 3 territories, but to become 2 new states. Independent Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont jokingly stated that he would support Trump's plan if Canada could extend its healthcare system to all Americans. On December 18, 2024, Trump published a post on the Truth Social platform calling for Canada to join the United States. He claimed that many Canadians support this option due to the potential tax savings and improved security. He also mentioned Canadian hockey player Wayne Gretzky, suggesting he could run for Prime Minister or Governor, giving him an easy win. Following speculation that Trudeau would resign, Trump reiterated the benefits of annexation, saying the move could improve trade and enhance security by eliminating the border. On January 7, 2025, at a press conference at Mar-a-Lago, Trump ruled out using military force to annex Canada, suggesting instead economic force to force Canada to join. He argued that combining the countries would improve national security and reduce the cost of protecting the U.S. border. That same day, Fox News commentator Jesse Waters opined that Canada should be invaded to satisfy Trump's imperialistic desires. Trump's comments on January 7 were widely condemned by Canadian politicians. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said that there is no question of Canada joining the United States, and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has declared that Canada will never become the 51st state. New Democratic Party leader Jagmeet Singh has called Trump a bully and dismissed his proposal as absurd. Shortly after these statements, Canadian officials stopped treating Trump's words as a joke and began to take them seriously. After Trump's inauguration, in his inaugural address on January 20, 2025, the president announced that during his second term, the United States would expand its territory, in line with previous annexation announcements, including Canada. Later, in his speech at the World Economic Forum on January 23, 2025, Trump once again threatened Canada with high tariffs if it did not become part of the United States. His claim that Canada could avoid these tariffs by becoming a state surprised the audience. On February 1, 2025, Trump announced 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods, to take effect on February 4. Shortly thereafter, on Truth Social, he reiterated his earlier demands for Canada to become the honorable 51st state, promising zero tariffs and a military security guarantee in exchange for annexation. In January 2025, during a press conference in North Carolina, Donald Trump reiterated his belief that Canada should become the 51st state of the United States, promising that under American rule, Canadians would gain lower taxes and better health care. These proposals were met with widespread opposition in Canada, with almost all political parties condemning the idea, and deepening tensions in relations between the two countries. Over time, Canadian politicians began to treat these proposals as a real threat, not just satire. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau firmly rejected the proposal, emphasizing that Canada would never become part of the United States. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre also declared that Canada would not become the 51st state. However, on February 7, 2025, during a private conversation, Trudeau stated that Trump's proposal stemmed from a desire for access to Canadian resources, which he treated as a real interest on the part of the United States. Green Party leader Elizabeth May criticized Trump's proposals, pointing to the differences between the two countries' political systems. Canada is a constitutional monarchy with a king as head of state, while the United States is a republic with a president. May also jokingly proposed that 3 U.S. states join Canada. In response to growing threats of annexation, numerous anti-American protests took place in Canada. On February 1, 2025, after Trump announced new tariffs on Canadian goods, fans at an NHL game in Ottawa interrupted the performance of the American national anthem, loudly boycotting it, and during the performance of the Canadian national anthem, O Canada, they applauded the Canadian song. Similar protests have also taken place at other sporting events in Canada. In response to the annexation proposals, an Ottawa company designed a cap with the words, "Canada is not for sale," modeled on the Make America Great Again cap worn by Trump supporters. The cap quickly gained popularity in Canada and became a symbol of opposition to the idea of annexation. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, a vocal critic of Trump from the start, has worn it in public appearances on numerous occasions, including at a meeting of Canadian Prime Ministers in January 2025 to discuss relations with the U.S. There were also polls conducted in Canada on Trump's proposal. The results clearly indicated a lack of support among Canadians. In January 2025, between 71% and 90% of respondents said they did not want Canada to join the U.S. In contrast, in the United States, only 25% of citizens supported the proposal, while 49% opposed annexing Canada. Modern secessionist and annexationist movements in Alberta have a long history. Reasons for seeking affiliation with the United States include a sense of inequality with Ottawa, long-standing dissatisfaction with federal policies, and a different cultural identity. Alberta had strong economic ties to the southern United States, which deepened feelings of alienation, and the introduction of programs such as equal payments that were perceived as disadvantageous to Albertans caused frustration. These feelings have their roots in the early 20th century, when Alberta felt left out by the federal government after its annexation into Canada. Secessionist movements gained momentum after Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau introduced a national energy program in the 1980s that burdened Alberta's oil industry, leading to much resistance. After the program was abolished in the 1980s, separatist sentiment waned somewhat, but resurfaced in the 2010s and 2020s, particularly after Justin Trudeau's energy policy. This led to the creation of the Wexit Alberta movement, inspired by Brexit, which has gained some support, although support for separation was 29% in 2019 and fell to 19% in 2022. Tensions have also increased since the introduction of a freeze on the bank accounts of Freedom Convoy protesters. Two separatist parties, the Wildrose Independence Party of Alberta and the Independence Party of Alberta, are currently calling for independence, but not annexation to the U.S. A more vocal group on the issue is the Alberta 51 Project, which is calling for Alberta to become a U.S. state, which would involve a new constitution, the elimination of customs barriers, and a larger military presence. Although the project has its supporters, support for annexation is less than one-third of Albertans, and the idea is unlikely to materialize. In response to Donald Trump's proposed annexation of Canada, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith initially dismissed it as a joke, but in the face of trade tensions with the U.S. she refused to sign a joint statement by provincial leaders regarding Trump's threat of tariffs. Smith opposed federal plans to restrict energy exports to the U.S., saying Alberta would not accept such action. Instead, she promoted increased purchases of American raw materials and opposed tariffs on oil exports. In January 2025, Smith met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago to discuss energy issues. She warned that blocking energy supplies could lead to a crisis of national unity. The Alberta Premier actively lobbied U.S. lawmakers to prevent the introduction of a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, especially oil. She emphasized Alberta's role in the U.S. energy sector, also suggesting the development of infrastructure projects. Critics have accused Smith of prioritizing Alberta interests over Canadian unity. Analysts like Peter Zahan have pointed out that Alberta could benefit from annexation, given its strong, resource-based economy. Jordan Peterson has highlighted Alberta's growing frustration that it may consider a future outside of Canada if federal policies do not change. Others, like Rob Breckenridge, have warned of a loss of autonomy and resources if annexation occurs, pointing to the need to find new leadership in Canada that can address the challenges while preserving the country's unity. In January 2023, during an interview on Tucker Carlson Today, American commentator Tucker Carlson asked provocatively why the United States was not sending military forces north to liberate Canada from Trudeau, joking that his statement was merely madness. 137. In Canada's history, fear of annexation has often appeared in the context of various political proposals. In 1911, the Conservatives opposed a reciprocity treaty negotiated by the Liberals, arguing that it could lead to an American takeover of the economy and annexation. In 1988, the situation was reversed, when the Liberals used similar arguments against a proposed free trade agreement with the United States, although the agreement was implemented after the Conservatives won. The fear of annexation also appears in the book Canadian History for Dummies, where humorist Will Ferguson notes that John L. O'Sullivan believed that the U.S. manifest destiny was to take over all of North America, but did not suggest that the U.S. annex Canada. 138, 139. In response to Trump's proposed annexation, political satirists, including the Rhinoceros Party of Canada, have sometimes proposed reverse annexation, or the annexation of the United States to Canada. After the 2004 election, a satirical Jesusland map was circulated, in which the blue states would become part of a United States of Canada. In 2019, a petition was launched for the U.S. to sell Montana to Canada to pay off its debt. In response to Trump's proposal, Green Party leader Elizabeth May proposed in December 2024 that California, Oregon, and Washington join Canada in offering health care and stricter gun laws to get rid of those states that always vote Democratic. 143. A Newsweek article attempted to analyze the implications of annexation for the United States. It noted that Canada has a slightly larger population than California but a land mass 25 times larger, although Canada's economy is smaller than several U.S. states. The merger could increase trade but also increase competition for businesses. Canadian author Don Tapscott suggested conditions that could make the merger possible include preserving Canada's healthcare system, maintaining the province's identity as states, and reforms on issues such as campaign finance, education, and gun control. Tapscott noted that Ontario would become the fifth largest U.S. state, and that Canada spends less on health care than the U.S., while achieving a longer average lifespan. Critics, however, point out that annexation could see nearly half of the province's population moving to different U.S. states, which would significantly reduce the province's population. While the idea of annexing Canada by the United States may sound exciting, the real chances of such a scenario remain slim. Yes, some voices, especially from Alberta, are calling for change, emphasizing the benefits of such a merger, but they face enormous obstacles. Cultural, political, and social differences, as well as a strong sense of national identity in Canada, make such a scenario unlikely. While there have been moments in history when the idea of annexation has been considered, today both Canada and the U.S. are much more diverse, and the geopolitical realities are much more complicated. However, the topic remains relevant. It will be interesting to see what the future of this debate looks like. Consider what would happen if Canada really did become the 51st state. What about the national identity of Canadians? What changes would American politics face? What do you think? Will Canada ever join the United States? Let us know in the comments, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes full of fascinating analyses.